Well, let's get into it. Viva Frei joins us. Later on, we'll have Dr. Scott Jensen. He's the candidate for Minnesota governor. He's a husband. He's a family practitioner. Two of his children are physicians. And we're going to talk to Dr. Scott Jensen after he's talked to Viva for a little while. You can follow Dr. Jensen. I'm going to find all that for you in just a mere second. It is on X, Dr. Dr. Scott Jensen, Jensen. And of course, Viva Frei joins us, vivafrei.com, Vivafrei, and also the Viva Frei on X, and the Viva Frei program on X. And you can follow him everywhere on Locals and on Rumble. He has been a force to reckon with through some of the darker days of the COVID pandemic. And he's been monitoring so many of the legal excesses. And we'll talk a little fascism, a little Hitler. Why not? I mean, if the world is delusional, why not step into that delusional system for a minute? Right back after this.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous.
I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that?
I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
Joint and muscle pains are exhausting and frustrating, but I've got a over-the-counter medication I want to introduce you to that provides great relief using the power of, check it out, chili peppers. Capsidin is made with a proprietary formula that contains no non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, no opioids, no anesthetic or steroid, nothing, no chance for addiction, no side effects. No chance it's going to interact with other medication you might be taking. Capsidin contains capsaicin, which is the substance in chili peppers that burns your tongue. That gives you that burny feeling. And of course, I've recommended capsaicin creams to patients over the years, but other capsaicin creams burn your skin. That's what makes capsidin so unique. In clinical trials, capsidin has actually been demonstrated not to burn.
I've been using capsidin to relieve my pain in my hands and my wrist from carpal tunnel syndrome and arthritis. The results have been amazing. I use it every day during my show, and I highly recommend it.
Get the pain relief you need from various sources, even backache, sprains, bruises even. Order now at capsidin.com/Drew to get a 15% discount plus free shipping. That is CAPSADYN, capsidin.com/DREW. And before we get going here, I want to remind you that our audience knows that we are all about food freedom and about medical freedom. And what you choose to consume does affect your health, of course. RFK has been reminding us of that over and over again, as had the Mean siblings. Paleo Valley delivers overall nutrition and metabolic stability, especially if you go for the bone broth protein and the beef sticks. The reason we urge everyone to go with Paleo Valley is that their food is carefully, impeccably sourced, and the bone broth is made from actual bones of grass-fed and finished cattle, not hides, as so many are. And as you know, we've talked to Autumn repeatedly, those protein sticks, which come ton of varieties, superb, very little calorie, packed with nutrients. And one thing you'll recognize, every ingredient that's in those products, they're fermented, as I said, low in calories. Get some for yourself and for your family at drdrew.com/paleovalley. And if you're new to the company, it's 15% off your first purchase. If you're already a fan, you can subscribe to save 20%. That is at drdrew.com/paleovalley. Oh, our friends over there, we love those guys. And we eat all their stuff constantly. So let's get my friend Viva Frei back in here. It's always, last time we saw him was in Florida. Viva, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back.
You're now in your studio, in your home, right?
I am. You'll notice I have the good lighting. I was just at the beach with my kid and we were
not just good lighting, not just good lighting. It's that we evidently Susan and whoever does your background consulted because the colors are precisely the same.
Someone told me like a fluorescent, whatever this neon purple is the the live streamer's color. My wife ordered this thing on this side, and it gives me a nice purple halo. So
nice, well done. So There's two big topics that have been on, well, three now really on my mind this week. I wonder what's on your mind, but let me just throw out mine. One was that HHS document that showed once and for all everything we had been suspected was happening as it pertains to the COVID excesses and the COVID response excesses were in fact happening. That did in fact cost taxpayers $1 billion for nothing. That's one thing that's on my mind. The other is, of course, the Nazi gathering that happened like 2 blocks from here. I actually was, I was in. Someone is knocking at the door. I know. So I was. Yeah, I know. I know. Maybe now they're going to stop us. I mean, it would make sense. Maybe it's the Nazis coming to get me. But I was going to pick up. It was a Sunday, right? And so I'm going to pick up something from a pharmacy that you couldn't. You know, there were no other pharmacies open, and I didn't think anything of it. I thought, oh, it's over by Penn Station. Here I go. And Penn Station, of course, is where the Madison Square Garden is. And they came up out of Penn Station into the chaos. And the interesting thing was, two things jumped out at me. One was the international press trying to make sense of things. I heard more languages that I'd never heard before than I ever had. They were all doing it on sort of, pirated kind of systems, like they're on the phones and stuff, speaking, sounded kind of Slavic languages, trying to make sense of what was going on there. But the really interesting thing was all the negativity was coming from the people demonstrating against the Trump people who were heading on into Madison Square Garden, and it felt dangerous.
Drew, growing up, I heard the expression liberalism or leftism is a mental disorder. You're a doctor, I'm just a hypochondriac, but I believe I can identify mental illness, and I'm not even trying to be flippant about it. People are, they're going effing crazy, and like crazy to a point where I believe there are puppet masters, and not to sound like Alex Jones, crazy, tinfoil hat, whatever. There are people pulling the strings and manipulating those that they know are mentally vulnerable. And this overdrive of Hitler talk, it's, first of all, it's objectively insane. Set aside the fact that Trump has Jewish grandchildren and a Jewish son-in-law, and his daughter's now Jewish. Set that aside. They're calling this a Nazi Hitler rally. They have the founder of Death Row Records, who happens to be a black man, giving a speech. It's absolutely. I saw dancing. I say religious Jews in the street, and someone puts out a tweet, worst Nazi rally ever, and I was like, oh, you finally found the elusive New York Nazi Jew dancing in the streets. They're very hard to find. People have lost their. But what they're trying to do, what the people, the people pulling the strings are trying to do, they're trying to whip up mentally vulnerable people to do something objectively stupid. They know exactly what they're doing. And it's coordinated from the political elite and from the media sycophants. And I say it's dangerous in an actual sense, but I think Trump has beefed up his security. But this is just, it's absolute insanity. There's no other word for it.
It is, and I've been saying it. I've got some thoughts. I listened to some more presentations by Matthias Desmond about mass formation, and that it's just fascinating me to watch this all happen in real time. And what's even more fascinating to me is why you and I didn't get hypnotized by it, and how we can pull other people onto the boat with us here. That seems to be our job. He was saying that free, sincere speech was the antidote, one of the main antidotes. And it's interesting that we have sort of fallen in behind the free speech movement, because if we can't speak, we have no hope.
Well, that is the obvious answer. But we're dealing with forces that go beyond speech, and it's not a question of like putting any qualifiers on the importance of freedom of speech. We're dealing with manipulated thought, and half of these accounts on Twitter, I thoroughly am convinced they're either not real people, or they are people who are paid to go out there and foment this insanity. And then you have people who are low information. I won't call them stupid, although I call them stupid on my channel sometimes, but low information people who get easily manipulated by this. Oh my gosh, Trump. Like, I know people up in Canada who think Trump is an evil, rapist, racist. And they're people I see in real life, because what they do is they're busy, they live in the lives, and then they watch The View, and that's where they get their information from. And so it's like a trickle-down insanity. But how did we pop out of it? I remember seeing it in 2016, and that was my beginning of the red pill journey was watching the media absolutely lie about Donald Trump. And I'm like, but you feel like the crazy person when you're like, does everybody not see this? Like, you don't see that this is unfair, mischaracterizing. No, we're gonna, I think we have enough of a mobilized free speech, but just information army out there to try to hopefully wake up a few people. Some of them are too far gone, and others are, I'm thoroughly convinced, blackmailed as well. Bad Bunny just came out and endorsed Kamala Harris.
Oh, who's Bad Bunny?
Bad Bunny. Well, I'll tell you, I did not know who Bad Bunny was until this morning. But after the Tony Hinchcliffe joke, apparently Bad Bunny is a Puerto Rican American who, he's in entertainment, doesn't live in Puerto Rico, lives, on the mainland. But he's come out now, he's got a massive following, and he's supporting Kamala Harris. And so I've got this reflex.
Hang on, let me jump on this. And people complain that there's delays in my system, and so the only way we can talk is if we kind of jump on each other a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to have big pauses for us, which we're trying to avoid. So as it pertains to Puerto Rico, I read some data. I've been to San Juan, beautiful, by the way, but I have no knowledge of this directly. But what I was led to believe through a very small amount of reading was that Puerto Rico apparently has a garbage problem. They're having difficulty getting garbage off the island. And that makes perfect sense to me. And Tony, whom I know well, who's an extremely talented comedian, was making a joke built off that fact. Not that Puerto Rico is garbage or Puerto Ricans are garbage. In fact, we got to get Chris Stefano in here, his wife's Puerto Rican, and get him to talk about it, see what he says. And to make a joke, suddenly now, again, we're going back to the land of jokes are not allowed.
This is the problem. When you make a joke, if people don't understand the factual basis to the joke, they won't get the joke. Now, I did not know that they had this landfill problem either. It's a relatively obscure reference. I do know about the great plastic garbage patch that's out in the ocean, the microplastics garbage patch. I think it's somewhere between California and so I just assumed that was the joke. And only now, so I go and look and say, look at that. Puerto Rico has a landfill problem. They have a problem, which is not anything about the people, but only about the governance. When people called Chicago a shithole city, you're not talking necessarily about Chicagoans. You're talking about a poorly governed city that has too much crime. But they pretend not to get jokes when they want to weaponize it. And then you got George Lopez, who I don't know what's happened to him, and I don't want to judge. But you get George Lopez yesterday making jokes about Mexicans stealing tools if you leave them out overnight. That gets a pass. Tony Hinchcliffe to the cleaner.
Right. And they raised a couple eyebrows at George Lopez, who has made his career ribbing at Mexicans because he's Mexican. He ribs about his family. He's hysterical. I used to go on his show back when he had that nightly show, and we riffed about Yesca and what's the Mexican word for marijuana? Anyway, he's great to deal with. He understands. He's telling jokes. He loves his heritage. No, not hooch. Look up Mexican for marijuana. There's a specific thing, but I'm so uncool. It's pathetic. But I want to switch off the comedy because this is a corollary to that, which is when people become psychotic. Actual psychosis. One of the features is concrete thinking. So if you ask a psychotic person, we actually do parables as a way of seeing whether or not their thought process is concrete or not. So you take a psychotic person with a delusional disorder and you say, what does it mean you can lead a horse to water and you can't make them drink? And they will say, well, you take a horse and you bring it over to a stream and they won't drink if they don't want to. They will say that. Susan, I hope that's not your explanation for that aphorism. But or the other one we always say is people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Psychotic individual will go, well, if you're living in a glass living room, you throw a stone, the glass will break. That's concrete thought. That's the way they're going at the jokes. Like a psychotic person. Do you agree?
No, but Well, I agree, but then there's layers to it because at the higher levels, they know it's a joke and they're just pretending not to get it. But they know
Do
that there
they,
are people,
or are they psychotic? I'm starting to wonder if they're psychotic. Because guess
well, no,
what? Let me jump. Go ahead. Finish your
I would say
thought.
they're psychotic for other reasons. Like you take a Billy Baldwin out there who literally said, he says, if you're black, Latino, or a woman and you vote for Trump, you have no self-respect. He's psychotic for another reason. I would probably put him with narcissistic personality disorder, not psychosis. But he knows that he's manipulating people. Yeah, which I think makes him narcissistic. But there's people out there who are just low IQ and are going to say like, yeah, he just called all of Puerto. First of all, they're going to say Trump said it, and that it wasn't. There's when you eliminate the comedian as the link, then it becomes not a joke, and then it becomes something that Trump said, which is what they're doing right now on The View. Deliberate manipulation, knowing that they have low information voters who are going to buy into it hook, line, and sinker.
So the other psychotic phenomenon is something that I didn't really, it didn't come clear to me until the last month or so. So I worked in a psychiatric hospital for 30 years. And back, particularly in closer proximity to World War II, like in the 80s and early 90s, when I walked around the wards of the psychiatric hospital, it was a freestanding psychiatric hospital, only patients with serious psychiatric illness, I heard Nazis referenced all over the place. Lots of preoccupations about Nazis amongst the delusional patients. And we would just go, oh my gosh, you know what? It's how uncomfortable. I wonder why the Nazis? Why always the Nazis? But always the Nazis and Hitler. That's sort of, if you're going to be paranoid, you kind of go there, right? That something horrible is going to happen. It must be the Nazis. This is delusional thought process. If we took logic and applied it to Madison Square Gardens, whatever's going on there tonight is also a Nazi gathering. Because any gathering in that room, which by the way is not the same room that Hitler met in, or Hitler's supporters met in, that was down the street a ways. This is a new Madison Square Gardens, but any now gathering there, it must be a Nazi gathering by logical de facto, no?
What's the opposite of the no true Scotsman? I guess we're going to have to call this the no true Nazi or the all true Nazi.
Explain.
If they've identified you as a Nazi, everything you do will evidence the fact that you're a Nazi. Right. If you're an extremist, everything you do, if you stay quiet, it's going to be evidence that you're tolerating violence. If you say something, so they've labeled 70,000. No, it's malicious at the higher levels, and it's delusional for those who are buying into it. They've labeled 70,000 people, black, white, Latino, Puerto Rican, Jew, as Nazis. And in their mind, it makes sense because even if you're Jewish and you support Trump, well, there were a lot of Jews who supported Hitler. But it's definitional. Whatever those, but the problem is it's depressing, and I think it is
depressing. It's depressing, it's desperate, and it's why I don't do well with paranoid psychotics, because I don't like people that can't be reasoned with. I don't do well with them. They frustrate me because I try
to occasionally interact with them on social media, and then you realize like there's no point except to convey a message to others who are actually having a functioning brain.
Yes, watching that. So this all made me think a lot more about mass formation. What are you putting up there, Caleb? I'm not quite sure what that is.
I'm just showing how many Nazis there are in America. Like the Christmas Spectacular with the Radio City Rockettes. Nazis.
Oh, I see.
Over here,
the Rockettes are Nazis.
Nazis.
Last one. Well, God forbid a devil-worshipping rock band get in there, because that's not just Nazi, that's Santeria or something. But anyway, okay. So be that as it may, it made me think a lot more. And before I forget, let me just say this. Viva, where can people see you? People that want to follow your stuff, where do they go?
Google Viva Frei and you'll get a slew of stuff. You'll see my daughter having her tooth pulled out by a squirrel, but vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Yeah, when we were in Canada, I attached a dental floss to a granola bar and then to the tooth, and then a squirrel took the granola bar and pulled out the tooth. It worked on the first try, but if you Google Viva Frei, you'll find me, no problem.
Who thought of that?
Obviously, I did, Drew. We did. We pulled the tooth. We pulled the tooth with a drone. We've done a drone. We've done the squirrel. We've done a meteorite. Yes, sir.
A meteorite?
Oh,
Make
yeah, I
sure
have
you use that. I don't want to know. Make sure you use that brain for good, okay? Just stay in the zone of good and just.
I'll continue
right,
fighting
right?
the psychos on the internet.
Okay, good. I don't want it to go askew. But to that point, I started thinking about. I always think about the mass formation, and I've thought about crowds for many, many years, and we've now lived through this mass formation thing. I mean, I saw people who I witnessed their behavior, and I went, "Oh, this is how the Germans became prison guards. This is how that worked." Seeing young, newly minted security guards screaming at me, "Where are my papers?" because I didn't have the right papers, screaming at my hospital where I've been attending for nearly 40 years. But okay, Matthias Desmet points out how somewhere around 10% of people don't fall for the hysteria. 20%, 15, 20% are all in, and 70% are just trying to stay out of the way and stay out of trouble and get along and are sort of scared by the whole thing. We got to get that 70% on board. The brainwash group is sort of help. We can't do much with them. But he was saying that he felt, and you tell me if you agree with this, that a big portion of the source of this particular mass formation, COVID mass formation, was loneliness. That we are truly socially disconnected. And now we are even more disconnected by social media, which gives us this illusion of connection. And it was the social media that was delivering the poison, if you will, or the virus of mass formation. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that and how to get people not to fall for it next time.
Well, that is interesting in terms of the isolation leading to easily manipulated people. And I think that's part of the reason in hindsight now why they implemented what they did with COVID the way they did it, is that they alienated, isolated, terrified, and that makes people very easy to be manipulated. Drew, you're a doctor, you'll appreciate this. I had a conversation with someone who was a smart person that I knew since childhood, who we were arguing about wearing masks outdoors. And the person said, well, it's possible if you sneeze as you're passing me on the street and the particles go in the air and come, it's possible that I could get sick and die from COVID. It's like, that's how you've rationalized in your mind demanding other people to wear masks outside. That's crazy. And there's no further discussion that can be had from there. But I think they know that. And I really think the mass formation.
Well, no, I think I think they believe it. So let's just look at the mask thing. So first of all, surgical masks have been found to have no utility. The N95s, because people don't wear them perfectly indoors, they mask up between bites and things like that. That's what makes the N95 not work, though it might work if people wore it perfectly. There have been 2 cases of out-of-door transmission of COVID in the world. And there was a well-documented, they were this close. They reported themselves. And by the way, the sneezing.
They were yelling at each other for not wearing a mask.
That's really funny. The sneezing. The sneezing is back to the confusion people have about droplet transmission versus aerosol transmission. There is some evidence, the droplet, 0 transmission. You can essentially spit in people's mouths the way this virus works. It's an aerosol that has to be breathed in. It's the nasal mucosa that the binding occurs. And if you rinse your nose out with saline or chloride dioxide, or various things you can rinse that is much more efficacious, it turns out, than any masking. And yet nobody talks about it because there's no talisman to wear to signal you're part of the unity. You're part of the caring group, while the uncaring won't wear a mask. Crazy.
But it's 1,000% right. And I didn't appreciate it at the beginning where people were saying this is a sign. This is an outward sign of compliance. And I'm like, look, I was in Quebec. People were nuts where you'd get physically assaulted if you didn't wear the mask indoors. But it's 1,000% accurate in retrospect now, and I can identify it going forward. Wearing the mask was an outward sign of compliance. It was an outward sign of adherence to the ideology.
Also membership. Membership.
As is the Ukrainian flag in the bio, the syringe in the bio, the he, him pronouns or the she, her pronouns. These are all, pledges of allegiance, so to speak, but of the most unhealthy kind. But I think the mass formation, this group behavior really started 4 years before COVID with Trump. And I'm
Yes.
sort of now in retrospect thinking this was all a massive operation. But I'm trying to think of how it, had various iterations throughout time. It's just group behavior, and people I think can be, led into docile compliance or vitriolic hatred, which is what started in 2016.
Yes.
Went into 2020, morphed into Ukraine, morphed into the Israel stuff that always brings up people's passions, but morphed into pronouns, morphed into self-flagellation in the name of wokeness and white shame. And yeah, I see it playing out over and over again. How do you wake the people up? You start polite and start soft, and then eventually they need a cold glass of water in the face. Metaphorically speaking, not physically speaking.
But it does beg the issue how to make sure that people that are getting swept into the whole Trump movement are not also in a mass formation. Because mass formations happen all the time to people, even people that are aware of mass formation. We're prone to it as human beings. So the question would be, how do we know, if you're a member of that group, how do you know you're not in a mass formation yourself?
That requires insight, introspection, which I don't know if it can be easily acquired in adulthood. I think a lot of this has to start with how you not train, but educate children to think critically. I'm probably not a good example because I'm wildly obsessive, compulsive, and neurotic. But if you're thinking something, when I think something, I say, why am I thinking this? Why is this my reflex? And am I doing it out of some sort of groupthink, or attack myself as much as I would attack anyone else for their thoughts? And that's how I sort of keep myself in check. But and also be aware of my own neuroses. I was terrified for the first 2 weeks of COVID. My daughter's friend gave her a book, and it's like, leave the book outside for 2 days. But I was always neurotic, and that actually, the whole COVID thing made me less of a germaphobe. But I was terrified, and then I came out of the terror, and I said, oh, locking up outdoor dog runs, that's not science, people. And then I started getting very wise.
It is in fact the case. The interesting thing to me is, I think you put your finger on the right note, which is that 10% that doesn't get swept into a mass formation really is the responsible party, right? And so you must make sure you're in that 10% that is not being brainwashed, whose ever team you're on. See, this is the thing. Whether you're on The View, or whether you're you're at Madison Square Garden, or you're, one of the, these COVIDiots or COVIDians, whatever we characterize them these days, you must make sure that you have objectivity and you're not being swept into groupthink, and that you lead the 70% along in a healthy, proper direction, as opposed to caving to the brainwashing, which has become that people can't see it. To me, is just wild. But it exists on both sides, to be fair. Because one side is really doing it a lot.
Well, one side is much bigger, much more vocal, and has many more levers in terms of social media. But look, the Q phenomenon is a good example of. I don't believe the Q phenomenon on the Trump side was organic. I do think that was also an operation, but they definitely tapped into people who were like, yeah, I'm trusting the plan. Oh, what Q says, and so it does happen on both sides. And then the question is, you just have to be as intellectually vigorous on yourself as you would be on someone else, and you'll pull yourself out of a silo if you are actually falling into one. Like,
you gotta be careful. It's hard, man. It's hard.
Oh yeah, no question. Especially when you also don't know what you can even believe with your own eyes. Some of these videos and some of these tweets, I was like, how do I even know it's real? And then when I see the real video, how do I know that it's not AI? So it's tough, but. My goodness, we're
I would argue. I agree. I'm in there in that kind of mode too, and I would argue that skepticism is healthy, and that we have learned. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? Believe no one. Believe not even your lying eyes. Nothing. Start with. Start like Descartes. I think, therefore I am. That's the best. I'm thinking, therefore I'm here. Let's just start there. And move forward from there. But before we are going to have Scott Jensen in here in a few minutes, and he's a physician, and I want to raise some of these issues about mass formation.
Stay?
Yeah, Viva, you can stay right with Dr. Jensen here. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I figured. But I'm wondering, before I bring him in, what's on your mind? You do an incredible job analyzing some of the legal nonsense that's out there. I'm wondering if you have some ideas about anything. You watching the Menendez brothers, or what's on your mind from the legal
I'm
front?
trying to get distracted with something that's not election related, but I can't. I'm emotionally invested in this. Like I cannot wait for the results to come out next Tuesday.
You're
But then
Canadian.
even then, I know. I have aspirations of potentially. First of all,
What's wrong with you?
if America falls, if Kamala gets elected here, go back to Canada like that. Okay, well, it's communism everywhere if Kamala gets elected. And if she doesn't, and these people who are have now been thoroughly brainwashed into thinking Trump is Hitler, how are they going to respond from November to January? So trying to distract myself, but no, it's election related stuff, and I'm also trying to not lose track of what they did during COVID. Just today, I was talking about that we have a national citizens inquiry in Canada that they're going across Canada taking testimonies from doctors, and Dr. Bridle was testifying about how Health Canada knew when they were talking about this safe and effective jibby jab that they knew everything and they were lying to everybody in real time. But getting people to understand that is one thing. I think people want to forget and not forgive. They want to forgive themselves, but they want to just forget it, pretend it never happened, and move on. And I won't do that until people are on trial for what they've done.
No, and I think that's right. I mean, the attempt is to say we didn't know, we were doing our best. How come some of us knew? How come you couldn't? I talked to Dr. Redfield about this. I'm going to tell Dr. Jensen about it.
Dr. Jensen knew.
Dr. Jensen knew. Dr. Redfield knew. Dr. Scott Atlas knew. Lots of people knew who, guess what, looked at the data. If you looked at the data, you knew, and then you were told to just scram. There's something wrong with you. You're dangerous. You want to kill people. Oh, okay. That's what I do when I look at data. I think about how I can use it to kill people. Okay, that's as delusional as everything else we've been dealing with lately. But it's I can't get over what they did. There's a group of us, you're amongst them, that we just can't get over what they did. Nor should we. There's got to be some sort of reckoning. Yeah.
The more time that goes by, the more you realize how absolutely not even devious, devilish it was. Where Health Canada, UK government, they were telling you things that they knew were wrong, that they had no reason at best to tell you were true. But while they're telling you it's safe and effective at preventing transmission, yada, yada, they're signing supply agreements that stipulate we do not know the long-term effects of this stuff. And so they knew that they were lying when they lied. And they all just, I think what they're relying on is that a lot of people have done this to themselves and potentially even to their loved ones. And if they have forced to admit that they might have hurt themselves and the ones that they were put on earth to protect, that's too much of something to ask them and to admit. So they just want to forget about it. But I won't.
I'm happy to say I remember it pretty vividly. I was struggling to get to the truth the whole way. And I was recommending the vaccine early for my elderly patients, and people still give me shit about that. And I was, and I still think it was the right thing, even though there was risk, and I could tell there was risk, but the risk reward was there. Immediately, I became concerned about mandates for young people. That already, I was like, oh, something's way off here, and it turned out to be more off than I imagined, frankly. But let's get into some of that when we talk. When we talk to, oh, here we go. I should have my medical license revoked for platforming morons. Sorry, Viva, you seem to be a moron. Your legal training qualifies you as such.
Ask Caleb to bring that person. I want to see what the name was, just to know if it's one of the trolls who follows me around.
Growalski, is that somebody that goes in?
Medical license.
I get.
Well, the individual got the attention that they were desiring, or who knows, it might have just been a joke that translates poorly via the...
I was anti-vax at the beginning. I'm not anti-vax now, nor was I anti-vax at the beginning. Were you anti-vax at the beginning? Maybe he's talking about you.
No, first of all, I got two of the Pfizer shots. I say luckily I made some mistakes and didn't make others.
I got three.
No, I tell you, like
three, most of them. I got the J&J.
We went to our pediatrician, and my wife, who's a PhD neuroscientist, just asked a simple question: how do you know that it's safe for kids? It's like, oh, it is. Well, then we had some questions, and then.
Yeah.
When did you say that, Drew?
Did you say Democrats were like Nazis? Is that something you say? Because I didn't say that. Did you say that? I said people that believe that. I said people that Wait, I said that anybody that believes they're Nazis running around this country are fucking delusional, and I'll stand by that. Let's take a little break.
No,
Be right
no,
back
it
after
was Hillary Clinton who said that because she talked about Madison Square Gardens, and that's the same place that her husband Bill was doing the Democratic National Convention at not a couple decades ago.
Of course.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to. No political
That's who
gatherings.
John's
MSG,
talking
sorry.
about Hillary. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
No, but
All
I
right,
think maybe
we're
John
back
John might have taken your joke literally when you said the Dems must be Nazis also because they had a rally at Madison Square Gardens.
Oh, I see. Okay. That's a joke. Concrete thinking is the inability to see the nuance imbued in the concrete words that are being spoken, and it's not a good sign. It speaks of delusionality. Be right back after this. The Wellness Company knows that taking charge of your family's healthcare is a top priority, and that is why they are constantly innovating to deliver the products and services to help you be rationally ready for an emergency. They've added a medical kit for kids to treat over 20 childhood illnesses: nausea, vomiting, allergies, asthma, bioterror, God forbid, croup ear infections, lice, and more. And you can also order the kids kit with an EpiPen. Carefully sourced, great price. If there's a risk of anaphylaxis for your kids, you want that EpiPen. That can be in all kits, each customized for a different purpose. It comes, of course, with a telemedicine consultation and a guidebook, and you can replenish the meds up to 2 years after the date of purchase. So go to drdrew.com/2WC for 10% off any medical emergency kit or supplements. That is drdrew.com/TWC. I want to teach you about pharmacogenomic testing. This is changing the way we approach healthcare. By analyzing a patient's genetic profile, pharmacogenomics helps physicians personalize drug treatments for more effective results. First, it enhances medication efficacy by predicting how a patient will respond to a specific drug, reducing the trial and error process, especially in mental health care. For example, it can guide the choice of various medications to minimize side effects and improve outcomes. In the long run, pharmacogenomic testing leads to cost savings. It shortens the time to find the right treatment and avoids expensive side effects. It also supports more personalized care, helping physicians make better decisions and ensuring that treatments are tailored to each individual's unique genetic makeup. Test simply requires you to swab your cheek, then you send in the sample to our lab. Discover the power of personalized medicine with pharmacogenomic testing. Tailor your treatments based on your unique genetic makeup. Reduce trial and error, avoid side effects, find the most effective medication for you. Take control of your health today. Go to drdrew.com/checkgenetics. That is drdrew.com/checkgenetics. I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it. I make Susan take it. My whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins, and a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid, and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue, and we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15, pentadecanoic acid, it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/Dr. Drew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15.
Hey, Dr. Drew.
Dr. Drew.
You want to spend the whole session talking about Dr. Drew?
There you go. Even you call him Dr. Drew.
And finally, a reminder to stay cozy this fall with Cozy Earth. Their best-selling bamboo sheet set is made from 100% premium viscose from bamboo. Soft, breathable, you will sleep several degrees cooler. And their women's stretch knit pajama set, also made with the viscose from bamboo. Timeless classic, keeps your temperature just right all through the night. Cozy Earth is dedicated to turning your home into a personal sanctuary. which was they use only the best fabrics and textiles. All their bedding and bath products come with a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty. But once you experience the comfort of Cozy Earth, you will not want to go back. Wrap yourself in luxury this fall with Cozy Earth. Go to cozyearth.com/Drew. Use the code Drew for an exclusive offer of up to 40% off. And in their post-purchase survey, say you heard about Cozy Earth from this podcast. Again, that is COZYEARTH.com/DREW. Viva Frei with me today, and we are going to be joined in, I believe, right now by Dr. Scott Jensen. He's a physician. He was a state senator. He was a candidate for governor, and he has been at the forefront of the excesses or pushing back on some of the excesses of our government during COVID. Dr. Jensen, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dr. Drew, and it's nice to meet you, Viva. I look forward to a conversation.
I might ask you questions of medical natures on the weekends. Doctor, I'll need your email.
I can only take so many, Scott. But be that as it may, I'm right now looking at, I'm trying to get this back. Susan, can you set this up? I'm going to read the original title. When you and I first were on this stream together, it was September of 2020. And before I even got my first episode of COVID, the title was How to Avoid COVID-19, Immunity and Social Well-Being for All. Think about that. At the time, at the beginning of this disaster, we were already thinking about how not to allow these excesses to hurt us, our social functioning, our mental health functioning, and how to be reasonable with this virus, how to look at our immunity and how to fight it reasonably. And nobody was doing that, and public health has still neglected to do that. It's why when I got COVID, I sat in the windowsill every night and said, you can get monoclonal antibodies. The government's already bought them all. You can get them. They'll come to your house. It is free. No, public health refused to say anything about that. To me, those were very dark hours. Where are you now, Dr. Jensen?
I think you're right, Dr. Drew. I think those were very dark hours, and I think that some things have gotten forgotten along the way. First off, when the COVID pandemic was first announced, I would guess that 95% of the people wanted to do the right thing. And I think most people recognize that we were in uncharted territory. So when we, in February and March and April, saw representatives of the CDC, and you had the head of NIAID, Tony Fauci, and the World Health Organization do this big flip-flop on masks, that was telling. When you saw political people moving the goalposts, they got compliance from the people initially to flatten the curve so we don't overwhelm the healthcare facilities. We saw people literally negotiating as to what was an essential business and what wasn't, who was safe and who wasn't. We saw political leaders participate in these negotiations. It started out, we were uniformly concerned and we wanted to do the right thing, but literally within 90 days, it was the everyday person, the common sense person who recognized that it just didn't fit. And I think that the mainstream media thought that they could sort of jam it down our throats and they could tell us what to think and what not to think. And if we started to veer from their narrative, then we were conspiracists. But I honestly think that what was happening, and you talk about mass psychosis and you talk about the inability of psychotic people to think in an abstract manner and that they're stuck on concrete sequential thinking. But I think what happened is I think everyday people are better at recognizing that cognitive dissonance that occurs in their head when they know that their beliefs and their actions don't line up. The number of times I take care of a patient and they will confess to me, Doc, I know I should make better nutritional choices. I know I should lose weight. I know I should take a walk 3 times a week, but doggone it, I just don't do it. And it makes me feel guilty. Those folks are experiencing a cognitive dissonance, and they did at the beginning of COVID. Millions and millions of people around the globe recognize that something didn't add up. And I think they started to analyze, talk about it. They got on social media. Some of the most telling insights coming from social media did not come from MDs, did not come from brilliant scientists. It came from everyday folks that didn't have any initials after their name. And Dr. Drew, you early on were a champion of those voices. You told them that they weren't stupid. You told them that they weren't foolish for insisting on scrutinizing things for themselves. And I think, Viva, you did the same thing. And I think that's why today we're seeing this, quote, crisis with mainstream media, saying that where people get their news, it's fractured, it's shards of glass. This is on mainstream media. They treated people like children at the age of 9 or 10 who are confined to concrete sequential thinking. When you and I know that once you hit 12, 13 years of age, you move from concrete sequential to abstract thinking. You don't need MD behind your name, and you recognize when there's a disconnect in your head between what you're doing and what you believe, and that's where the world started to fracture for mainstream media. And that's why I'm actually a little optimistic about the future, because I think a lot of folks are saying, go to hell, mainstream media. We really don't need you.
The problem is they're also saying,
exposed it. Go ahead, Viva.
I was just going to say the problem is they're also saying go to hell doctors and experts and professionals to some extent, at least the ones who they now know lied to them. I sent it to Caleb. If you can bring it up, it would be glorious. The headline, I mean, this is when, if it didn't hit you at this point, you don't have a brain. When the New York Times wrote, are protests dangerous? What experts say may depend on who's protesting what. If that was not a turning point for you, you will never be able.
This isn't the one. This isn't the one, but it also applies.
Because I remember having this discussion with a high school friend, and I'm like, they're calling Trump political rallies super spreaders and condoning Black Lives Matter protests. And then he's like, yeah, that's a problem. I was like, it's a problem. How are you relying on these people to tell you anything at this point? But yeah, it's people. The people who are most impacted by the decisions are the ones who have to question them. The experts and the politicians who don't suffer the consequences, well, they're not forced to question. They're actually more compelled to push because they're the ones who then become, the holders of the power and bequeathers of the rights.
Yeah, and I think in a weird way, I'm grateful for COVID because it exposed so much that we did not know was the case, or I would never have imagined was actually how things worked, but I'm seeing it differently now. And as it pertains to Scott, you and my colleagues, the very well trained can be more easily hypnotized sometimes, certain subsets. And once they're hypnotized, they are relentless in their belief system because they're used to, think about how we're trained. We're trained in sort of a military style system where you're asked to sort of listen to your superiors and do what you need to do and just, follow along. I guess I stepped out of line early and did a radio show about HIV. That was a hint that my future would include not being prone to going along. But to your point about the concrete thinking, it is incumbent upon so many of us to get the dissonance you're talking about, the people that aren't losing weight that want to feel that dissonance. These are people who did go along, but now thinking maybe they shouldn't have. We need to get those folks that are feeling that dissonance to really perceive reality on reality's terms and do so with speech and discourse and honest appraisal. And listen, it's up to us. Viva brought up the issue of not trusting experts. For you and I'm sure you'll say the same thing I was, Dr. Jensen, which is, here's how you reestablish trust. You admit where you're wrong. You correct course. You put evidence in put as evidence base as you can on everything, and keep trying.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, when I think of the physician mindset, we're trained to think of ourselves as always being right. We're told that even if we're not certain what the diagnosis is if we say it with enough emphasis, that matters, and our patients will take it to the bank that we know. So I think during COVID, I was in the Senate, then I was running for governor, and I had physicians come after me and just ridicule me. And I would reach out to them and say, hey, this is crazy what you're saying. Can we just get together and have a cup of coffee? Crickets. There was no interest in having a conversation because physicians see themselves as being elite. And in a sense, physicians are almost are blocked from sensing that cognitive dissonance because we don't let it afflict ourselves. We just blow right through it because we're always right. And I think
Yeah.
the everyday person, bit by bit, to your point, Viva, they did start to say, what's going on here? You've got Tony Fauci flip-flopping. He says you got to wear a mask, but there he is at the ball game. He's not wearing a mask. You got Gavin Newsom saying you can't be next to each other, not wearing masks. There he is at a swanky restaurant, close to people, having fancy dinners. I mean, people started to get it, and they said, no. Something is terribly wrong. Then the vaccine came. And I think the vaccine was a particular turning point because so many people wanted to do the right thing that they took the vaccine. And then when they did, they couldn't help but hear the stories. And so they slowed down, but they continued to want to do the right thing and not kill grandma. But when the pivot point really started to take place, and we started to realize that Pfizer knew way more than they were telling, and way more people were getting Guillain-Barré and Bell's palsies and clotting disorders and myocarditis and pericarditis. And it was literally, the monkeys had been running the zoo. And people recognized it. Then they got angry. And I think that's where we're at today. And I think that's partly why our election campaign season right now is so volatile, is there are so many harsh, violent feelings about what's going on. And you've got mainstream media still trying to control us. Someone says a word. Maybe they say something about the 1930s. Maybe they say something about the Vietnam War. You've got mainstream media policing our words and our phrases and our comparisons and our metaphors. I experienced it when I ran for governor. I remember my lieutenant governor candidate one time on a radio program. He complained that he felt that he had been attacked, and he used the word savaged because he felt that the attack had been that visceral, that intense. Well, then they went after him on that because they said that's a word that only pertains to the Native American population. And he said, what? I mean, you never know around which bend or which corner we're going to be told, you can't say that. You can't make a comparison to that. And this is where I think the American people, frankly, are telling mainstream media, go to hell. Today in the Strip.
Aren't they tired? Aren't people tired? Don't you think people are tired of this? They're just done with it. Yeah. Just too much.
Today in the paper in Minnesota, there was an article about if you don't take the COVID booster, there's good evidence that your IQ might drop. And it might drop 3 points or 6 points. And my wife asked me about this. And I said, Mary, I said, they're making assumptions that it can't. I said, I've never even bought into the IQ system of determining who's smart or who's not. I said, I thought that we really don't have a good way to figure out who is pragmatically able to scrutinize and reasonably think through things. And here we're sitting there being told
IQ was racist. I thought IQ was racist and sexist and classist and all kinds of things. What happened to them on that?
So if you want to raise your IQ 30 points, go get 10 boosters.
But wasn't there was a study that showed like the unvaccinated were more likely to get into car accidents and correlating it to the vaccine, not to behavioral stuff. Like this is where I'm not a scientist, but I've got half a functioning brain where when you try to attribute it to an actual act and not necessarily to people who might be more defiant of authority, might be more likely to get into car accidents or speed. I forget what it was exactly, but this goes back to the beginning of the show where like, it's the no true Scotsman or the all true Nazis where they made a decision that the COVID jab was the be all and end all cure all for everything. And everything that could be said to support that would be true. And everything that came out against that would have to be blamed on something else. Energy drinks, COVID, long COVID, bad air quality, stress, global warming. And so that's arguing from conclusions and not towards them. But maliciously so, because it's not just a lack of trust in the experts. They are confirmed to have lied, and they did it for profit. And there needs to be punishment for that.
I want to again sort of state my position, which is even though they rushed the vaccine out, even though the endpoints were bizarre, they were hospitalization and not death, even though they took no account of the people lost to follow-up, this is all the Pfizer studies, even though there were lots of side effects that they didn't alert the public about, even though they knew it didn't do anything to transmission, I support what they did in the beginning because we were trying to save lives with a virus that was running amok. As soon as we had Omicron, it was clear it was a different situation. In the meantime, mandating vaccines for young people seemed not just inadvisable, but downright insane because the risk reward just wasn't there. It was there for a 90-year-old or an 85-year-old. Even though there were risks of the vaccine, there were very serious risks of the illness. And let's not, pretend that this illness is a cold or a flu. It's got a lot more qualities to it. And by the way, this new one, I don't know, Jensen, if you're seeing XEC, but I'm seeing it and it's nasty. And the booster does nothing against it because the booster is directed towards JN1. And so, why are we pushing the vaccine? And why aren't we, again, talking about treatment and how to avoid and nasal lavage and all the things that we could be doing to improve the public health?
Amen. Amen to that, Dr. Drew. I could not agree with you more. It was almost as if by the time Omicron came around, people had drawn their lines in the sand and they weren't going to, in part because of what Viva is saying, they did not want accountability. People right now are desperately afraid, I think in part about the upcoming election, because they look at one side might allow things to sort of slide away and evaporate. The other side may demand accountability, which scares the pants off of them. But getting back to vaccines, I'm old enough to remember how powerful some of our vaccines have been to help our public health. So when people call me an anti-vaxxer, I just smile and I say, well, if I were an anti-vaxxer, I wouldn't be spending $100,000 a year purchasing vaccines for my patient population. But I've always been someone who said, let's keep thinking about this. I think that we really do have to, as a society, ask ourselves if we're okay with what Congress did in 1986 when they removed a lot of the liability from pharmaceutical companies when it comes to vaccines, because it seems like that really threw open the door. And now we have dozens and dozens more vaccines that are just hungry to get their foot in the door, because if they can just get one tiny indication, even if they don't have great research, even if the disease that it's working against isn't that big a deal, if they can get their foot in the door, they will be able to expand it, grow it, and that's called recurring income. And we saw Pfizer do it. We've seen it happen with other vaccines. And in part, it's done because there's no risk. There's no risk to hurting people. I had a patient a week ago, got a vaccine, arguably didn't need it, but wanted it. We gave it, and she got Bell's palsy within 36 hours and densely paralyzed one side of her face.
Yeah, I'm writing right now a response to somebody who says, you were anti-COVID or whatever, a COVID denier. That's the other thing. You get called a COVID denier if you were pushing back on the panic that the press was demanding, if you pushed back on lockdowns, if you pushed back on vaccine mandates. Those things harmed more people than the virus. It's well established. Trying to take a balanced approach to the illness, a risk reward. This is the thing that bothers me, Dr. Jensen. I'm worried, and by the way, there were videos of me saying, hey, relax, relax, relax. And at the end of every one, I said something that proved to be completely wrong, and they, of course, cut that out of all my videos. I kept saying, just listen to Dr. Fauci and listen to the CDC. They'll get you through this. And then I was shocked to see what they started doing. I couldn't believe it.
Well, thank God they cut it out.
Yeah, right. Well, that was the one thing I got wrong. Yeah,
you're gonna have to live with that forever, because the internet is what it is. And bear in mind, you might more likely than not be arguing with an actual troll who only wants the attention. The bottom line,
of course,
you took a position early on, and people will argue that the position you're taking now is influenced by the position you took earlier, and so you have to walk it back a little bit. But you might be too emotionally invested in your own decisions. Whatever. The bottom line, and this is what I would love Trump to say one day. They lied about all of the data. Operation Warp Speed was never intended to be a one-size-fits-all mandatory jab for everybody. It was intended to develop something for the most vulnerable while leaving therapeutic treatments available. And what it got turned into was a profit scheme that Pfizer lied to partake in, and they lied and people died. That's the reality. I have never been anti-vax.
Yeah, no, but Jensen, I don't know if you remember this, but when I'm on the record saying there's not enough vaccines on Earth for my family. I got them all vaxxed up, and I took all the vaccines and everything. And I used to tell a story that I was told, which was, hey, the reason they have these liability waivers is vaccines are lost leaders. They could never make any money off them, and so we wouldn't have vaccines if you didn't give the companies those protection. Turned out that's a complete lie. And I said that 100 times, probably 1,000 times to people. And that's one of the many things I got wrong, and I apologize. But that case was made to me over and over and over again, and that turned out to be a lie.
But Dr. Drew, to your defense, that conversation and the nature of it really started in 1976 with the swine flu vaccine when Jerry Ford was president. And the pharmaceutical companies basically said, if you don't provide us some sort of indemnification, we're not going to do this. We're not going to. So it started there.
Not that we can't make any money, but we don't want to have the liability. We were told it was both. I get the no liability. Of course they're going to say that. But damn, they really hoodwinked us.
When I came out, the first thing I spoke against was when they modified the way we're supposed to do death certificates. Then I came out and said, we shouldn't be locking in nursing home residents in facilities that are teeming with active virus without testing patients coming out of the hospital. Then I said, locking down kids is not a good idea because there's no mulligan and the kids are not at risk for death if you look at the statistics. Then I said locking down businesses didn't work. Then I said that we're overdiagnosing COVID because the PCR cycling threshold is far too great. And all you had to do as a physician was have 2 out of 3 symptoms without even a test: cough, fever, shortness of breath. Pick 2 out of 3, you got COVID. They were absolutely incentivizing us to make that diagnosis. Then I came out and I said, you're moving the goalposts. Then I said you're now telling us that natural immunity doesn't have an impact. We've known about this for thousands of years. Then I said, you got your models entirely wrong. Then I came out and said on the Tony Robbins show, what you're doing with masks doesn't make any physical sense. OSHA studies had shown that maybe some of the masks could give you 12 to 18% filtration, but you still had an 80% chance of having a 0.1 micron sized virus still get through. I talked about the epidemic of fear. I talked about the exaggerated use of executive orders. I talked about treatment protocols should have been focusing on getting people out and about, walking, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, all of that. We shouldn't have been doing to our military what we were doing to them. We shouldn't have been putting out immunization programs. We were promising people tickets to some celebrity concert or maybe a free college education. We did so many things wrong. And on every one of those, when I came out and spoke, I was investigated, it seemed, one more time by the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice.
Yeah. It's so weird that happened. I hope some of those people apologize. I'm sure they won't. But I'm wondering what happened. I'm wondering what they will not. Thank you. I'm aware, Viva. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, and we do want to hear about your campaign against Tim Walz and running for governor, and how that felt and what that was like for you. But before we do, really quickly, I'm concerned about the algorithmic approach to medicine. I almost feel like we're not training our young physicians to do what you and I cut our teeth on 50,000 times, which was a risk-reward consideration for each and every patient interaction, including, and not limited to, having somebody walk into the threshold of our office. That has a risk-reward attached to it. My listening to them in the office has risk-reward. My pulling out my prescription pad has a risk-reward. And you and I were trained to think that way all the time. I've talked to some younger students, they're like, well, why do I have to memorize all this stuff? I just look it up. And then when they get on the medical record tells them, requires them to follow an algorithm. Have we lost our physicians' risk-reward training, do you think?
I think we absolutely have, Dr. Drew. I think we've actually lost physicians being able to think creatively. We used to come up in our head with a differential diagnosis after we got done doing a history and a physical and maybe some lab tests and a couple of imaging studies. And then we would think about it and we'd run through it. And I remember for me, it was vitamin C and D, vascular, infectious, traumatic, metabolic, anomalous, the whole thing. Right now, people are so interested in checking the box and following the algorithm. Our notes are horrible today. You can go to someone with a sore throat, and that provider will generate 8 pages of garbage.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
when someone comes to me with 500 pages of old notes, old records, and I look and they're taking no medicines, they tell me they've never had surgery and they have no ongoing medical problems. I say, well, how in the devil do you have 500 pages of old medical records? They say, I didn't know I did. I tell my patients all the time, if you give me 1 page to look over during our visit, I'm going to look over it. If you hand me 500 pages, I'm going to hand it right back to you and say, you sort through it because I don't have time. We've absolutely lost the ability to think. We've actually digressed. We've regressed into sort of a concrete, sequential kind of behavior instead of thinking abstractly.
There is something of an analogy between the practice of law and the practice of medicine, which the administrative state has taken away from the professionals. And when you had pharmacists and an administrative class basically saying what doctors could and could not do, it was analogous to when they started going after lawyers for what they could and could not do. And basically, algorithmic way of thinking about it is interesting, but I see it as more of a method of controlling the ideology of a practice that is already governed by a sort of licensure monopoly. And they did the exact same thing with lawyers. Like you couldn't challenge certain things. You couldn't take on certain cases because of the politics and the narrative behind it. And in so doing, they control the levers of justice itself in the same way they control the levers of medicine itself.
Was that going on in Canada as well as here?
Oh, yeah. No, in Canada, they were making lawyers take DEI pledges until that met enough of a blowback. But in Canada, I was getting ethics complaints to my bar society because they didn't like my tweets about, Trudeau's euthanasia policy. So it's using the levers of the monopoly over licensure to silence the critical thinkers and maintain a sort of administrative control over the practice. And that's exactly what they did with doctors.
To be fair, we ought to talk about your ex-posts. They freak me out a little bit. But anyway, so no,
they're not intended to be read concretely, Drew.
I do abstract. I do. But Dr. Jensen, tell us about the run for governor, what that was like. We have someone now running for vice president that you were up against. How did that go for you?
Well, I'd been in the Senate for 4 years, so I'd had a chance to work with a previous governor, and then Governor Walz was elected, so I worked with him for 2 years, and he and I did work together on an insulin bill. So I was certainly aware of his affability and the fact that he could bloviate at a moment's notice. I mean, he could throw a bunch of words at you that when he got done, you sort of thought, now that sounded good, but what did he say? So I think he's sort of infamous for giving you a word salad. But I think running against him, one of the things that really struck me was the fact that he and his team, I thought, were very strategic. They looked at what President Biden did in 2020, sort of hunkering down and not going out much and not engaging in debates. And Tim Walz did the same thing with me in 2022. We had sort of an impromptu debate at an agricultural festival, and it didn't go well for Tim Walz. He sort of lost his temper. He looked a little bit disheveled, and he told the press after that debate at this farm festival that, he was going to have more debates against me because that's what Minnesota campaigns involve. But he then went back on his word. And I understand why he did that, because strategically, it was the right move. They had the Roe v. Wade being overturned, and they had the Democratic machine in a blue state, and they had tons of money. So I think that Tim Walz he's a skilled politician, and his team knows how to work to his strengths and try to get away from his weaknesses. And so I hold nothing against Tim Walz at all. I think if a person was going to go out and have a beer with him, I think you'd have a fun time, and you'd probably talk about the Vikings or the Packers. But I do think that him as a politician, what you see is sheer ambition. You sort of see a Teflon approach where nothing sticks to him too much. You're not going to get a lot of discussion about the issues of the day, inflation, crime, education. You're going to get a word salad more often than not, and you're not going to get what I would consider a deep-seated commentary about convictions that he's held for a long time. You're going to get more of a zeitgeist in the moment. Tim Walz is going to put up his finger and say which way the wind's blowing, and he's going to match up with that as best he can, because he is good at being the zealot for the issues of the day. And he latches onto those very effectively. And so I think he's done well in the Democratic Party. And it's astonishing to me that I'm the last guy who debated Tim Walz, and the fact that he could possibly be vice president of the United States of America does sort of blow me away.
We'll find out, but it is. I wish there was, that the way you described him was less routinely characteristic of politicians. That's deeply not that he's troubling to me. That politicians tend to be that way is troubling to me. But there does seem to be, and Viva is I always give you shit about being a Canadian, but as being somebody from, who's come down here with great passion about our country, I'm wondering if you see things that we don't see. In other words, as you look forward to next Tuesday, what do you see that you think we're not seeing as, people that live with this system our whole life?
No, I think everybody's seeing it. I think what Americans are seeing now is the value of free speech and what happens when the government controls the levers over it. The interesting thing is I'm listening to Dr. Jensen's take on Tim Walz, who he undoubtedly knows better and in a different way than I do. All that I know is him from the sound bites of the interviews, the TV. And I don't think Tim Walz is evil. I think he's opportunistic and painfully stupid and dishonest. But I always wonder, in as much as I vilified these politicians in my own head, what are they like in real life? I'm sure he's friendly with his dogs. I don't think he's evil. I look at Kamala Harris and I question whether or not she's actually more evil behind closed doors than she even appears in real life. And I look at Justin Trudeau and I say, is this, on a personal level, is this guy a decent guy? But I just hate them so much politically. It's amazing that you have a dishonest, pathological liar of a Tim Walz who could potentially be vice president next week and one heartbeat away from the presidency. Two of the most incompetent, dishonest, insincere, disingenuous candidates I've ever seen. So close, but hopefully so far away. I cannot wait until next Tuesday. I'll say it's going to be a week of anxiety.
I don't know if it's going to be resolved on Tuesday. Dr. Jensen, do you have any sense of whether we're going to have a result by the evening?
I don't consider myself a very good prognosticator, but I do have, and perhaps it's a little naive, but I do have a lot of faith in our checks and balances. And I think our Supreme Court federally is up to the task of what they might be called on to do. I think our legislative branch is the same. So I'm optimistic that we're going to have an election, that we're going to have a peaceful succession of power. And
for sure.
I just don't know what's going to happen. I do think that in terms of the Democratic hard left agenda, I think an awful lot of Americans that normally would have voted Democrat are saying, that's a bridge too far. You're asking me to go along with literally undercutting the very essence of what the American Democratic Republic has been. So in that regard, I'm optimistic because there's an awful lot of folks out there who think that freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, these things really matter. And I think the mainstream media being so tied to the liberal Democratic Party, together, that combination of mainstream media and the hard left agenda of the Democrats scares an awful lot of people who routinely are independently minded.
And I think our state system is the other part of the genius of our system that buttresses us against the excesses of a federal government, which was really just supposed to be about defense and interstate commerce. And the fact that they are so involved in our life is beyond to me, but be that as it may, there we are. We started this conversation talking about mass formation, and we're ending this conversation with the remedies that Viva and I had brought up long ago, which was free speech, careful thought, watching out for cognitive dissonance, taking in reality on reality's terms, giving experts a chance to adjust course, and starting with people that seem honest and forthright and admit when they're wrong and change direction and show you their work. But there are people out there we should be able to build trust with. Don't trust anything or anybody right now. Everything is none of us three either. I would suggest you don't trust anything or anybody but you do allow trust to be built, because this last few years have taught us that we cannot trust a lot of people that we used to think we could.
Well, I'm a little more cynical than Dr. Jensen in that whatever bad experience or bad lessons you lived through in terms of the medical profession are as true with the judicial process. And I don't have faith that the courts are going to do what they need to do. They didn't do what they needed to do in 2020. I don't have faith that there will be a peaceful transition of power if the Democrats lose, much like there wasn't when Obama lost. He spent 3 months spying on his incoming presidential, not predecessor, but the one who replaces him. So the only way that this is going to be peaceful, peaceful in the sense of non-litigious and not social chaos, is if the victory is so decisive that they are compelled to admit that there is, it's not unanimous, but it's decisive enough that they say, well, we're not going to challenge it and we're not going to tear this country apart, much the way they tried to do in 2016 and did in 2020. But I wouldn't rely on the courts for anything.
Now we have a line in the sand. We have a prediction. We can reconvene at some point in the future and discuss whether Viva was correct. Dr. Jensen, you had your prediction, which was a little more peaceable, if not peaceful.
He has faith in the court system. Come on.
Well, what do we know? That's one of the things that, we believed in a lot of things 5 years ago that we are questioning now. So it's healthy. It's healthy. That's all I'm saying. We didn't know we needed to question all this, but lo and behold, we do. And so it's fine. So, gentlemen, we appreciate you being here. It's good to see you both. Keep up the great work. Viva, we'll give you each a chance. Let's start. Viva, where do you want people to go to see your show?
Go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. or Rumble, Viva Frei.
Viva Frei. And Dr. Jensen, you have a book out. We Got Played, I believe, isn't that the name of the book? Caleb does a full screen of the book. There it is. We've been played.
Yeah, people can simply go to Dr. Scott Jensen, DrScottJensen. That'll get them. You can just Google me and that'll pop you up to a lot of things. Then my website is drscottjensen.com, and that gives you access to all the different platforms as well as ordering my book.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Caleb, let me look at the schedule coming up. Cheers. We appreciate it very, very much. Coming up, we have Carrie Lake and Jack Posobiec. Not to freak everybody out, but I might have to change the time of that one, Caleb, because I've been asked to do some stuff. I will be on...
Hey, my show's not on there.
Oh, yeah.
October 31st, calling out with Susan Pinsky.
She's doing a Halloween show.
Halloween, everybody.
Of course,
we're going to
she's
talk
doing
to
a Halloween
dead
show.
people. Naomi Wolf is my guest, and I have two great psychic mediums.
Maybe we should get you in the shot here.
Caleb doesn't love me. Oh. He turned my camera off.
Okay, there you are. There you are.
Wait.
Yeah, so
there you are.
Wait.
So yeah, I have medium Cindy Keza and
that's
also
a good one.
Lauren Sunshine. They're coming together to talk about aliens and Naomi Wolf. She's not an alien, but
no.
Naomi's
awesome. And we have Jack Posobiec also on Thursday. And we have put
Secret Powers.
Lauren
my list
Rainbow.
back up.
Lauren Rainbow.
Oh, sorry, Lauren Rainbow.
What does she call her?
Lauren Sunshine.
Oh.
Okay. All right. Well, I tried.
Lauren
I
Rainbow,
had to
Cindy
plug
Kays,
it,
Naomi Wolf, and then put my thing back up again if you could, Caleb, so I can get the. We have Salty Cracker coming in. We have Jillian Michaels coming out. I think she might be even be in studio. Jimmy Dory, that special event on November 8th. Debbie Lehrman, Lisa Moran. Okay, there we go. We got a lot of stuff coming up, and the schedule's a little choppy because we're traveling. Giving a talk in Pittsburgh on Saturday. And we look forward to figuring out, living through this peaceably with what's the word, or sort of, give me a word, Susan, for peace of mind and verisimilitude. There's
calmness.
Yeah,
serenity is a good one. Serenity is a good word.
Somebody said we should talk to Hitler on my show.
It's Halloween. Maybe it'll happen.
You never know. I talked
Maybe
to
the world will
Stalin
end
once.
prior to that.
I did. Gilbert Gottfried wanted to talk to Stalin.
That sounds like him.
And he did. He said, the psychic said that he advised Gottfried to wear those shoes, because that Stalin wore lifts in his shoes. And Gilbert Gottfried is a very short man. So a little historical information.
Be that as it may.
But he did come through.
As we say, my engineers.
Maybe I can get Stalin. We'll have to conjure him up.
All right. So that's what time? 11 a.m.?
Or maybe we can get Gilbert on.
Susan, what time is your thing?
We're going live at 2 p.m. 2 p.m. Eastern, so that's 11 a.m. Pacific. It's an earlier show because we don't want to mess up the trick-or-treaters, you know.
Also, don't we have to travel?
You know, Caleb's got 2 little kids, and they got to go
They
trick-or-treat.
gotta do.
Yeah.
We want to make sure of that.
What are they dressing up like this year?
We're all minions. Because that's Camden's, he's obsessed with minions. So everyone has a minion outfit. I'll get a photo. I'll post a photo up here soon. But yeah, he calls them minimins. He loves minimins. Yeah, you'll love it.
Okay, so we are, let me get this straight. We are away tomorrow. Is that correct? No show tomorrow?
Yes, that's correct. No show tomorrow.
And then we're back at 3 o'clock Pacific on Wednesday. And then we're at 2 Pacific on Thursday for Susan's program. So until then, we'll see.
Drew might be on my show too, so we have some special surprises for him.
Awesome. See you next time. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.